everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. This is the week of December, what are we looking at here, D? December 9th, and we have quite a few interesting topics to discuss. We're going to only have 2 more episodes, this episode and then the one after that, and then Demetrius and I will be wrapping up Season 4, taking a break before we come back with Season 5. Good morning, D. How you doing?
I am doing pretty good. It's going to be an interesting week for news, I think. A lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, one of the things that actually happened last week after we had dropped our episode is I started thinking about it and I realized it kind of feels like the old guard CEOs are all retiring. Like when you think about it, like Jack Dorsey stepped away, Mark Benioff from Salesforce, he's staying there for a while, but he brought on a co-CEO, and I imagine he will eventually step away. I can imagine a couple more might be happening in the near future. Maybe it's just time to transition from these mid '90s mid '90s actually early 2000s CEOs to just a new group of people kind of leading the charge.
Well, I think it's one of the reasons why people like having the founders as CEOs for a period of time, at least, is that the founders have a vision for the company.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that CEO needs to bring to the job. But at the same time, as much as I sometimes feel that the structure of a CEO job needs to be updated, um, it is kind of a high stress position and it takes up a lot of time. And a lot of these people want to get to living their lives, and they absolutely should. So it's the kind of thing that, like, like a White House West Wing position that it turns over after a few years, and it totally makes sense that it would.
Yeah, and I've met a couple young CEOs in the past who are starting companies that just got funded, and they actually walked away even way sooner than that. And when I asked them why they walked away from it, they said, I just don't feel like I have I have the skills in order to build this idea, get it off the ground, get it funded, get it moving. But I'm not
Hmm.
really a CEO that has experience with kind of growing a company once it's like fully funded. You're adding in all like the healthcare, the payrolls, and that kind of stuff. And they had stepped away and brought someone else in, and then just were basically a daily advisor, like working with them
Hmm.
daily, and liked having that role better just because they felt like they weren't experienced enough. But some of these CEOs, I mean, they have no experience and they could build, $1 billion company and continue rolling with it. But to your point, like, after a while, it's time to change things up and see how things unfold when you bring some new blood in.
Yeah, and you think about who a CEO surrounds themselves with. They have a good COO and a good CTO and a good CFO and all the other staff. Then they don't really need that much experience with it. I mean, you look at Steve Jobs, for example, right? And he didn't have any experience. He didn't have a college education. I mean, he went to college, but he never graduated. Uh, and he did a great job as a CEO, partially because he brought vision to the role. And I've always said that one of the biggest differences between Apple and many of the other companies out there was they just had the guts to do the things that other people didn't have the guts to do. And when he passed away and Tim Cook took over, or Tim Apple, whoever you want to refer to him,
Oh, geez. I love
that
that, dude. I'd
company.
love it if someone called me that. I'd be like, that's cool.
I mean, you gotta reference the Tim Apple whenever that name comes up.
Exactly.
But it's a company that is still Apple and is still functioning, but it doesn't have the same sense of vision and progress and new visionary products coming out like it did before. It feels like it's being managed, not as though it's really being led.
Yeah, I've actually read quite a few articles about this topic because Tim Cook is an amazing operator. I mean,
Hmm.
pretty much anyone would love to have him running operations, manufacturing, logistics. Like that's his specialty. His entire career, first at IBM and then at Apple, has been about scaling and manufacturing, all that kind of cool stuff. Definitely different than Steve Jobs, right? Like he
Oh
knows
yeah.
how to like take a product and like fine tune it, get it manufactured, get it to the masses, that kind of stuff. Steve Jobs, he took some swings here and there, and he failed at some of them, but like he was a visionary when it comes to trying things out, thinking things through, and that kind of stuff. I think that's really hard to find.
Yeah.
To find someone who could be an operator and also a visionary at the same time. I almost feel like the way to do it is if you feel like the founder was able to kind of get to a point where the company's moving and they're like heavy visionary, bring someone in who handles all those operations and let them kind of think through the next generation of product.
Well, I feel like that's a
Yeah.
large part of it, right? It's like you don't a CEO doesn't have to be an operator. Right? That's what the
Yeah.
COO kind of is for. Is that's the person who's actually running the operations, making sure the trains are on time. And the CEO is kind of providing that vision, providing direction, those kinds of things. And we're going to get to some conversations about companies like Twitter, and it'll be interesting to see if that kind of comes forward and becomes like a major theme for a lot of these companies who are getting new CEOs.
Absolutely. Well, hey, let's talk about our first topic of the day, which I think is quite interesting, which is President Biden's Build Back Better bill. There is some controversy, and you hear it a lot in Silicon Valley because the incentives that were provided to electric car companies are not being provided to Tesla. And it's primarily because the incentives are for companies who are union shops. And Tesla is not, as well as other car companies that are not based necessarily here. But this is it's just a debate. It's a conversation about whether or not you should be providing incentives to all electric car companies, regardless if they're union shop, or if you want to kind of drop the hammer and say, hey, look, we want to get the middle class back up and running. We want to have union shops. We want to, partner with the unions because, hey, in the past it worked really well. And now there's a point of contention here about whether or not this bill should pass with the language it currently has, basically indicating that you have to be a union shop in order to receive these incentives. Elon Musk obviously is not happy about it, of course, because it
Mm-hmm.
gives his competitors a slight edge. Also, he has benefited and their company's benefited from a ton of subsidies and loans as well, but now he's critical of it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, it feels very self-serving to me. Obviously, I mean, if he's referencing things like, "Oh, it's affecting the budget, and subsidies are bad because they rack up the budget." I'm like, my immediate response to that is, if you really feel that way, why don't you return the over $10 billion in subsidies that you've received for your companies? Not to
Yeah.
mention the fact that the budget deficit is partially driven by contracts that are given to your SpaceX company. So how about you cut your prices on that so you can bring the budget down? Like, put your money where your mouth is. But conceptually, looking at this, I don't have any problem with incentives going to some companies and not others. Tesla is a company that's now valued at over $1 trillion, even after the stock took a slight dip today. It'll probably be back up tomorrow when people buy that. They don't need subsidies. The subsidies should go to where they can be most helpful, and that is to develop other competitors to Tesla, because competition is important within a capitalist society. So they benefited from billions and billions of dollars in subsidies. If you want to make it fair and set like, all right, well, here's a subsidy cap. Here's where these other companies catch up with Tesla. Then that makes sense. But tying it to union shops to make sure that the companies who are getting this are competitive with each other and not going to kind of below market rate labor in order
Mhm.
to compete. I think that's probably good. And if Elon Musk took a look at it and realized that, okay, well, the fact that this is not going to companies who are, underpaying their employees helps me, because it means that I don't have to necessarily compete with with a competitor who's going to undercut me in that sense.
I always try to take a step back because one of the things that happens is we get really in the weeds when it comes to the growth of these new segments. But if you take a step back and you look at it, anytime a brand new segment occurs, and this doesn't happen that often when you think about it, right? Like when the personal computer kind of came out, now we're talking about electric cars and autonomous vehicles, things like that. I think we need to look at it and say we kind of need all of it. You need
Yeah.
loans, you need subsidies, you need competitors, you need everything if you want the entire segment to grow. And
Yes.
I will go back to what Elon said 10 years ago, which is that his primary goal was to help with climate, right? And that
Hmm.
he originally said that he would love tons of competitors in the space and that he was opening up his patents and all this type of stuff because he just wants a tremendous amount of electric vehicles in the market in order to reduce emissions, right? And
Yes.
and I 100% agree with him. I think that's a great way of doing it, and I think that's part of the equation of climate change. And I think give him credit, has led the way. I mean, he has fought a lot of fights to kind of push this through, and part of that is just creating a great vehicle, right, and making people
Hmm.
want it. I think this is one of those things where Tesla's in a good spot, and this is going to help the other competitors come in. At the end of the day, and he has said this, Steve Jobs has said this, and a lot of people have said this, at the end of the day, it is the competition between the quality of the product. If you have an amazing car, people will buy it. And if you don't, then people won't buy it and they'll buy the competitor. So this is hopefully going to create even more competition between all of the electric car manufacturers, grow the entire segment, and help get us off fossil fuels
Yeah.
as our like number one source for automobiles.
Well, I think that's true up to a point. I mean, there's that. I don't know if you ever seen that movie, Tucker, A Man in His Dream, about the Tucker
Mm-mm,
vehicle that was made. I think it
mm-mm.
was a Francis Ford Coppola movie. I'm trying to remember, but it was about somebody in the I want to say in the 50s who just developed a better car, and the rest of the industry just buried him. So the car never really made it to market. It was
Yeah.
safer, it was faster, it was more. It had all numerous advantages over the cars being put out by Detroit at the time. So I think that a lot of these companies are coming up as startups when you're competing against $1 trillion market giants who got there partially because they received a lot of help from Uncle Sam. It's disingenuous and it's ultimately handicapping for them to not receive the same benefits that those market giants got. So it would be, I think, a major mistake not to support those companies who are going to try to compete with Tesla.
Mhm.
Because the reality is, if we want to get to the point where that electric vehicles are the majority of vehicles on the road, we're not going to do that by just having Tesla have a monopoly over electric car market. We need a thriving competitive landscape in which a variety of different electric vehicles are out and competing with each other and establishing the market as a whole.
Yeah, and then let me ask you personally. This is 2021. We're going into 2022. Has your brain tipped toward like maybe one day you'd want to own an electric car compared to like 10 years ago when we were all like, I don't know, it doesn't go that very far yet, that kind of stuff. But like, has it tipped over to where you're like, yeah, I think I'd be interested in having an electric car.
Well, I'd love to actually,
Yeah.
but to be honest, to be completely frank, like I'm kind of moving away from Tesla as an option, partially because the perception around Tesla and a substantial part of this is because of Elon Musk's behavior
Hmm.
is kind of feels a bit toxic. I don't really want to be associated with him because
Yeah.
he can't seem to behave in a mature way. Like if somebody insults him, he has to insult back. He can't take the high road. He can't show constraint. So I do look at like what electric vehicles are out there, like what the range is available, what the charging station is. And that's one of the things that got brought up in this debate was, the subsidies for charging stations and Elon
Hmm.
Musk feeling that there wasn't any need for that because they were being developed already and paid for by people.
Yeah.
But the issue with developing infrastructure like that is it's a chicken and egg problem, and that the charging stations won't get put places because they feel like electric vehicles don't go to those locations. But one of the reasons why electric vehicles don't go to those locations is because there's not a charging station there.
Yeah.
So with subsidies and support, then those charging stations can get to out of the way places that wealthy people with electric cars don't normally go, and that opens the market up to other people who might not otherwise buy electric vehicles.
Yeah. I mean, do you think he'll ever follow suit with what Jack Dorsey's doing or some of these others and actually take a step back and let someone else take over Tesla? He hasn't been on the last like one or two earnings calls. He's kind of just let it be handled by his internal people.
I think it'll be quite some time. Like he's allowed his identity to get so wrapped up in these companies that he takes it as a personal affront these whenever his companies come under criticism, whether they're fair criticism or not. So I can't see him from just judging from the psychology of the situation and stepping away from those.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about our next topic here, D. I find this one actually super interesting because I actually have an experience with it. So, Amazon is launching its Alexa Together for families, which is basically a subscription program that expands on their original kind of attempt to create a care hub so they have this Care Hub feature, and what it does is it combines access to like emergency helpline, fall detection, response features, and remote assistance options to allow family members to manage settings on an elderly person's device, so they can monitor them when they're not around. So this is really interesting because before these services were offered, the Care Hub feature, and then now Alexa Together subscription service, I actually had a neighbor who was using their Alexa Show as a way of monitoring their elderly grandparent when they had to go to work during the day. And just basically pointing the device in their general area, connecting with them multiple times per day, talking with them, making sure they were okay, all that kind of stuff. And I thought it was really cool because the grandparent was able to just call out, like, call so and so, and then they can ask for things like, can you bring food or get my subscription or a prescription or anything like that. And it was like a really interesting hack in order to monitor that. Now they're actually creating this as a full service, which is awesome. So, like fall detection, that's super cool. You can tell if an elderly person fall based on, I guess, the audio or maybe the visual aspect of it, and emergency helpline and all that kind of stuff. I think this is the future for two parents or two people working full time and also caring for an elderly family member, having the ability to take care of them from afar. And I think this is down that vein that a lot of people think Amazon is going, which is assisting with the healthcare segment. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh yeah, I think it's an obvious implementation for especially for people our age where our parents are kind of getting up there and needing some more support. We absolutely use Alexa devices in our parents' homes for me and Christine. So I've got one in my aunt's house. I got one in my mom's house, and we use it to help kind of keep track of what's going on. They can send out voice messages or voice commands in order to call for help and things like that. It's a surprising use case, or at least something that I didn't think about beforehand, but
Uh-huh.
it totally makes sense, right? They can use the voice interface pretty easily, and it's similar to kind of like those old Life Alert commercials, where if they need
Oh
help,
yeah.
they just call for it, and it's there for them. So it all makes sense, and it all just kind of plays into Amazon's continued effort to just own the home. And as we saw during the pandemic, homes aren't going away. Lots of other things can go away, but the homes will be there
Yeah,
unless
especially with more
things
people
really
working
get
from
bad.
home, right? It's like you end up spending so much time there that you want that environment to kind of be smooth and kind of work the way that you need it to work. And I don't know about you about your area, but in my area, a lot of families have their parents living with them. So there's a lot of we call them back houses, but a lot of ADU dwellings being built in the backyards of a lot of the people on our street, and then they're having their grandparents or parents come and live back there, so everyone could be together. And that got accelerated actually quite a bit during the pandemic. And I actually went and looked this up too. I went up the Bureau of Labor Statistics and US Census data. And basically, we have about 54.1 million people over the age of 65 in the United States right now, which covers about 16% of the total population. So as those people age, we're going to need technology to help take care of them, especially if both people are working, which is a common thing these days, especially around here, where you can't have someone home all day basically monitoring somebody in case they need assistance, right? So I think this is great. I think it's a cool service. I think it's helpful. There is one big question, and I'd love to get your opinion on it, which is people are worried about privacy. Amazon now is basically in your home, not just when you're asking it questions, but they can see, they can hear, they know about the care, they know how many people are there, all that kind of stuff. How do you feel about that? Is this a concern at all?
I mean, it doesn't concern me. I've said this before. The biggest protection of your privacy is the fact that nobody really cares about you.
Yeah.
If you're not, a billionaire or a major government figure or someone in that vein, then nobody cares. Like nobody's gonna sign in and watch my cameras just because they're interested, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
they can get out of it. So uh, for that reason, I'm not really concerned. My mom, I think, isn't very concerned about it. I think a lot of younger people aren't very concerned about it. I know a lot of older people are concerned about, like my aunt and my mom. They both lost their partners, and they're living alone now. So I think it's they enjoy that, there is help a call away, and that gives them some peace of mind. But the reality is that they just probably aren't going to be targeted, because that's just not how it works. Like, there's not a lot to take from my mom's house, and my aunt lives in an area where, somebody's not going to come in there. Home invasions are incredibly, incredibly rare. We see them on the news, and they make a big splash that you hear about them happening from time to time. But your chances of being killed in a home invasion, you're much more likely to be like bitten by a shark and struck by lightning at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, it's a constant debate. I think the idea, like, if you walked by this device and they happened to see you early in the morning, maybe you weren't fully dressed, or you were having a really, um, heated discussion, about finances or anything, that kind of stuff, that the information is essentially being recorded. Um, but it can be deleted, right? So it's a complicated one. I think some people like yourself don't really think about it too much. Other people that I've met are like, dude, I want the technology, but I don't want my stuff being recorded, right? And so
Mhm.
maybe they could find a way to, like, set it up so it auto deletes everything after one day every day, right? So it's like no one can ever go back and see anything. So it's only like one day of data. I'm not sure if they already do that, but one of the things I was going to mention about this is that earlier this fall, and TechCrunch reported this in one of the articles I read regarding this device, is that they were already bringing the Alexas to hospitals and senior living centers. And so
Mhm.
Cedar Sinai in Los Angeles, Atria, I think you've seen those around probably, um, Houston Methodist, a lot of places are installing these devices because when they're in the room and they're alone during the day, they can simply say, "Nurse, help me with this or that. Nurse, I need this and that," and that information gets delivered to them, and it also can monitor whether or not they're getting in and out of bed, and all those things
Mhm.
that the device provides. So I think this is just kind of the beginning of them really getting involved in healthcare in a meaningful way. And I think this is really cool technology. I just want to make sure that it's handled obviously properly for the people who are a little more nervous about security.
Yeah, and one of the things I would say is that there are a lot of protections for privacy. It's the way that people treat personally identifiable information these days is above and beyond. Like, they really work very hard to make sure that people's identifiable information aren't floating around. At the same time, there are a lot of controls built into it. So if you go and read up on the this plan that Amazon just announced, it's all managed with permissions. It's all opt in, all these kinds of things, so that
Yep.
you only do it if you want it to be done. And at the same time, I'll point out, anybody who brings this up to me, I'll point out, like, you can't really find news stories out there or any incidences in which somebody who was not a celebrity was actually, hacked and spied on, or spied on by a company.
Yeah.
It just, to, I'm unaware of it ever happening. Like, if you're a celebrity or something, it happens, but that kind of happened before all this technology existed. You can go back and watch, like like old movies from the 40s, and about, like, the stalkers and paparazzi and everything, kind of following them around and taking pictures of them with film cameras and stuff. That's not new.
Yeah.
So I'm not really concerned about the privacy. I think that there is a kind of demographic age range of people who are concerned about privacy, and then once you get under, like, I don't know, like maybe 30 years old, people aren't that concerned about it.
Yeah, and also too, like, technology has this weird curve of adoption. I remember in the late '90s when Salesforce first started getting out there, and as well as VMware purchased this company. I forgot what it was called, But anyways, basically, it was this idea that you would use a terminal to log into a server, and then you would actually like type documents and all that kind of stuff, and then it would be saved on their server, right? And I
Mhm.
remember going to conferences, and I was at a couple of big tech conferences at the time, and people were like, "Never, never gonna. You are not going to get me to save my documents on someone else's server. They're going to be reading my personal stories. They're going to be reading all my work data, right? All that kind of stuff." Flash forward 2021, I don't know anyone who saves documents on their computer anymore. Everybody does it all in the cloud, whether it be like Google
Yeah.
Sheets or Salesforce's sales data, from your company or anything like that. I think this is kind of where that's at, where people are just starting to get comfortable with this idea of having
Mhm.
things recording in your house. And flash forward 10 years from now, everyone will have one probably and be super comfortable with it. And also be super comfortable with understanding how to like manage your security, delete your files, be comfortable knowing that your stuff is not, you know, too far out into the internet. But
Yeah.
but anyways, yeah, no, I just thought this was really interesting. I think it's a step in the right direction. It actually fills a real use case that exists,
Mhm.
and I think you're going to see probably more competitors playing in this space as well.
Well, it is tremendously helpful if my mom or my aunt needs some help and I don't want to, drive a half hour across town to
Yeah.
go, fix something for them, that I can use some of the technology to get a video call and they can just show me and it's like a 30-second fix. I had this one experience where my mom called me and said that she couldn't connect to Siri, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. You don't have to connect to Siri. It's just
Yeah.
there, right? It's an interface. It's on your phone. If you can turn on your phone, you can connect to Siri. So she had me come over, and what was happening was Siri couldn't connect to the internet. So I took a look at her router, and she had unplugged her router.
Oh.
And I was like, "Yeah, mom, it's not plugged in. It has to be plugged in to work." And she was like, "Oh, I guess I was doing something and unplugged it. I didn't think it was important." So those are the things that I sometimes wish I didn't take up like, an hour and a half round trip in order to fix.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It helps you be more efficient throughout your day, and it helps her feel more comfortable that she knows somebody's out there that can help. But
Yeah.
yeah, so let's talk about our third topic, which should be a quick one here. Actually, I just wanted to circle back on this new Twitter CEO thing. So the new CEO has been in for about 2 weeks, and he's already making big changes. So it looks like he's reorging the company so that it's not run. That engineering is not just one department, but engineering is kind of like broken up apart across the company, and people can work more efficiently and more quickly because his primary goal is to start moving really, really fast again. They want to start testing, innovating, creating new features, and really kind of taking Twitter to the next level. Um, Being somebody who was an engineer before and then the CTO and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure he's looked at this and said, "There's a more efficient way to do this, and we can probably get out there and create more features and really enhance Twitter if we can speed things up a little bit." And that actually speaks to pretty much what you were saying, which was like they haven't really innovated much, just made little
Yeah.
changes and adjustments. Time to like swing for the fences and see if we can turn this into a much better and bigger company.
Yeah, and reading through the article definitely sounds like their previous structure was just focused on maintaining the core product and that's it. And
Yep.
then because they had a single engineering pool that you had to pull from in order to get anything done. So if you're on a product team or a research and development team and you need engineering support, you had to request and wait for it to be allocated, and you get somebody for a certain amount of time. And then when they were done with that specific task, they might go back into the pool. And if you needed had an additional ask, they might send you somebody else. You now have to get them back up to speed. And the way that they've reorged it sounds a little bit more like what a lot of other companies have done, where they've said, all right, well, this product team who's working on this family of products or within this category are getting their own dedicated engineering team. They're not going to be reallocated to something else. They're going to stay embedded and they're going to work on this stuff so that as they're developing stuff, they're already going to be up to speed. They're always going to have those resources available, all these kinds of things. And it has helped a lot of other companies get products out the door, right? So as opposed to taking a long period of time in order to get anything done. Hopefully, this will help them to start to deliver some stuff. And I've said this before, but I'm sure that even though Tesla has, or Twitter hasn't really released a lot of features over the years, and almost none of them have been original features. Most of them have been ripoffs of somebody else's feature. Uh, that I firmly believe that there are people inside who have ideas and have some sense of vision. So we talked about this a little bit at the top, but CEO is ultimately their main job is to bring a vision and a direction to the company. And we
Mm-hmm.
haven't yet seen that emerge. Like I don't have a sense of where Twitter is going as a company, but it sounds as though this infrastructure change kind of clears the way for that to happen.
Yeah, and he kind of gave a little bit of a tiny little insight into their thinking when it comes to their opportunities, because he did say in his interview, and this was from the Verge article that you and I will reference and drop into Twitter when this episode drops. But he said the opportunity around DMs is really key. It's a way to
Mm-hmm.
connect with anyone around the world and expect to hear back from them. So, and they also acquired that company Quill. So I think it's a messaging app. So I think he's probably looking, if I had to take a guess, to kind of get a little bit more onto the WhatsApp side, where you're actually creating a messaging platform within a global messaging platform. So, like while you're on Twitter, like reviewing stuff, you're also probably talking to people, communicating with friends, all that kind of stuff in a more seamless way, kind of the way that it happens when you're on WhatsApp. That would be my guess. I don't know. We'll see how
Mm-hmm.
it unfolds.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, my experience with Twitter is that it's very depersonalized. Like
Yep.
the interactions don't feel like I'm, deeply interacting with another person and understanding their perspective. Part of that's the character limit, but part of that is just like you're just two kind of separate entities in different parts of the world who are having this quick exchange. So the I think that there is an appetite for more person to person conversations as
Uh
opposed
huh.
to just kind of snipes back and forth. So maybe this can foster this. I sometimes definitely see, celebrities and public figures falling into the trap and thinking that their Twitter followers are their friends
Mm-hmm.
and saying things like, I think this happened with Roseanne Barr, where she said something where maybe her friends would think that it would realize that she's just joking or something like that, or at least that's how she seemed to expect them to take it. And then she's surprised when people are like, "That's really racist," and she was like, "Well, it's a joke, but these aren't your friends. They don't know you. They don't know what your what's in your heart, what you really believe. So you can't
Yeah.
expect them to just understand that that was a joke and you don't really mean it." So
Absolutely.
hopefully
Yeah.
this can kind of help out with that.
Yeah, and maybe it'll keep people on the platform longer and have a better experience and stuff. But anyways, this was just interesting that he's already moving quick, and hopefully we'll see some good stuff by maybe next summer. Um, and then our last topic of the day, which is one that you were telling me about and kind of educating me on, which is the Spotify and comedians and their royalty issues and that kind of stuff. Why don't you jump in and explain what that's all about?
Yeah, so apparently, comedians have had their content on a lot of these streaming services, and they've, as far as I can tell from the reading, they've been getting some royalties on the actual recording of their audio, right? So if they are have their stand up being played, they're getting some royalties for their recorded audio in the same way that a musician would. But in the music, in for music, the uh, the performer gets a certain royalty and the writer gets a certain royalty. So whoever
Okay.
wrote the song also gets a royalty. And if you're someone like Alicia Keys or Taylor Swift who writes your own music, you basically get royalties for both. And as far as I can understand, for comedians, they've been getting the performance royalties, but not getting the written royalties. So they've kind of grouped together under a corporate organization, and they've requested their royalties from a lot of these companies. And these usually take time to work out. Like the lawyers have to have their back and forth and make sure they're not overexposing themselves in some way by setting some kind of a precedent. But Spotify took the extra step of removing the content catalogs for any of the comedians, or at least a lot of the comedians who were making this claim, which was never, there was no cease and desist aspect to this agreement.
Yeah.
So they're kind of signaling that they are not going to pay. And there's a lot of there are a lot of comedians, some of them are pretty big names, who are not happy about this, and it's an issue. Like they're the people who are creating this content need to be compensated, and the at the same time the companies who are putting together these streaming services tend to operate on somewhat tight margins. So it'll be interesting to see how this works out, but this needs to be established. These comedians, they don't make a lot of money, and they work really, really hard, and they
Yeah.
spend a lot of time on the road. So I think it's important for them to be compensated.
Yeah. This could be one of those, if not worked out, this could be one of those pivotal points where, the biggest competing platform against, so Apple Podcasts, I think, is number one. I think is,
Mm-hmm.
if I recall, and I think number two is Spotify, or it's
Mm-hmm.
right up there. This is their thing, right? They're competing against Apple. All they have to do is piss off, a bunch of artists, and they just take their stuff off of there and put it all on Apple or all on Google or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that can cause a real big pain point for Spotify. And so they're incentivized to solve this as well, because it's just an app. At the end of the day, these are just
Mm-hmm.
apps. If people choose not to put their content on there anymore, it's just not on there anymore. It's over with. Right. And I
Well,
know
one of
that
the
it
yeah.
hurts their listeners, but at the same time, though, these things have happened in the past, where people
Mm-hmm.
bail from a platform and then suddenly the platform struggles and all that kind of stuff.
Well, one of the issues is less the giants, the people who are really well established. Like this article calls out Tiffany Haddish and Louis Black and Jeff Foxworthy and
Yeah.
those very established comedians. But the people who it hurts the most are the people who are lesser known, who
Uh-huh.
are benefiting from Spotify getting their name out there, and also receiving some element of side compensation, like a little bit of extra money by having their stuff hosted on this. So
Yeah.
the Lewis Black is going to be fine. And Tiffany Haddish is going to be fine. If they're making money from movies and television appearances and all these other things. But the people who are out there grinding it out on the road, those are the ones who are probably going to be hurt most by this.
Hmm.
And their position on it, for them to take it down, is them saying, like, we don't want to incur any additional royalties that we don't intend to pay, right? So that we don't want any additional liability. Now, other companies like Pandora and I think Apple and some of these other companies, they have not taken the stuff down. So it sounds as though they're saying, okay, well, we'll work this out. We'll pay you some back royalties, and then we'll pay you the royalties for ongoing royalties, and it'll be fine. For them to take it down is them saying, like, well, I don't know if we want to pay. We have a certain amount of liability. We don't want to incur additional liability by streaming this, so
Hmm.
we're just going to opt out. And the comedians are like, okay, well, now I've just lost a source of revenue because you haven't been, because of your mistake on the part of Spotify. And it's really unfortunate. It could create some backlash amongst the community of comedians to say, like, all right, well, if you're going to do this, then I don't really want to be associated with you. I'll just be on Apple Music and Pandora and Amazon. And a lot of those companies like Apple Music and Amazon, they are they have a variety of different income sources, so
Yep.
they don't need to worry too much about the margin on their audio streaming product alone. They can operate that at a loss in order to continue for it to grow.
Absolutely. And one other thing I'll say about this is that, I really love comedians, and I've been following many of them for many, many years, and I listen to a lot of podcasts and things like that. They look after one another. Unless
Yeah.
you're a super creep, obviously, and have some issues or whatever. But like for the most part, comedians look after one another. They see each other on the road. They help each other by in a plethora of ways. And so that's not a group that I'd want to irritate and hope that the big ones are just going to stick around because they like collecting their checks. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like they would be. It wouldn't shock me at all if Tiffany Haddish and other comedians were like, yeah, no, until you pay up everybody, we're out of here. Like
Yeah.
that is a group that sticks together and helps one another.
Well, the reality is Spotify had all that money to pay to Joe Rogan to get him on the platform. So at the same time, Joe Rogan, he's mostly known as a podcaster and a UFC commentator, but he is a comedian. He has a lot
Hmm.
of roots within comedy. So it'll be interesting to see if he takes a position on this
That's
and
true.
what Spotify's excuse is going to be after they paid all of these money to certain people and they aren't meeting their legally required obligations to others. And we've reached the point where distribution is commoditized. So especially for comedy, it's not as though your product, your content is receiving a superior treatment on Spotify than it is on Amazon or a Tidal or another streaming service,
Hmm.
or YouTube even. There's no reason why somebody necessarily has to go to Spotify.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, and the more of these services that pop up, it's makes it harder and harder. It's almost like
Mhm.
what I've heard from others, because we're obviously on Spotify and everything else, is they feel like you kind of have to be on all of them, right? In order to like really make an impact especially when you're first starting out. And then
Yeah.
once you have like a really big following, then you can kind of pick a couple platforms and just say, hey, everyone, I'm just on these platforms or whatever. But in the beginning, it really helps to kind of be everywhere. But hopefully they can get this worked out. This was fun, D. I love these topics that are wide ranging. Talking about like healthcare, and we're talking about like Spotify and comedians and that kind of stuff. This is always stuff keeps me interested and intrigued. But I just want to thank everyone so much for taking the time to listen today. We really appreciate it. We'll be posting links to many of our sources that we referenced on Twitter. So you can find us and follow us at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast number one. Demetrius drops those in early in the week after our episode drops. If you like this podcast, found it interesting or informative, helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. Like I said before, this is our second to the last episode. And then our very final episode, we'll be talking about something completely different. And then we'll wrap up the year there and start season 5 sometime early next year. So, everyone, have a great day, and we will see you next week.